Hi everybody, welcome to the third lesson in Chemistry Chapters 1 and 2, Chemistry, the study of matter and the changes that matter undergoes. Chem is try. Let's move on to the green section. First thing that we'll look at is chemical reaction terminology, reactants, products, and the yield sign. The second thing we'll look at is the periodic table. We'll learn about groups or families, rows or periods on the periodic table. The third thing that we'll do, third and final thing that we'll do is look at the types of elements, the metals, the nonmetals, and the metalloids. So let's get started. Well, when you're talking about chemical reactions, I'd like you to know that there are reactants and there are products. And reactants are the things that you begin a reaction with, and products are the things that are made in a reaction. So if you look at this example right down here, carbon plus oxygen yields or forms carbon dioxide. Carbon plus oxygen, they're on the left side of the arrow, and that means that they are reactants. There's the word up there, reactants. And then over here on the right side, there's carbon dioxide, or CO2, and that is on the right side of the arrow, and that means that they are products. If I take a match and start it on fire, some of the match chemicals that we start off with are KClO3, potassium chlorate, and this chemical right here, tetraphosphorus trisulfide. And these are called, do you remember what they're called? They're called reactants. How about the things over here on the right side? We make 16 KCl and 9 SO2s. Those are made in a chemical reaction. That's what you end up with. That's the final product. If you think about cellular respiration, it takes H12O6, sugar. There's some sugar in an apple. There's some sugar in there. It's quite delicious. And if I breathe in some oxygen, okay, that stuff is all the reactant. What I breathe out is carbon dioxide, and also some water comes out as I breathe too, and sometimes you get rid of water in other ways as well. So you need to know reactants, yield symbol, and products. Say it to yourself 10 times and you'll remember it. The next thing I'd like you to do is know a little bit about the periodic table. Obviously, when you see the periodic table, you can see that there are rows that go horizontally and there are columns that go vertically, and the vertical columns are called either groups or families. So you can talk about the oxygen family or the fluorine group or the noble gas family. I wish everybody stuck to the same terminology, but they don't. So you should recognize both of these terms. Groups, families mean the same thing. They're the vertical columns. And often these things have rather similar properties. For example, if you go way over here to the left side of the periodic table, lithium, sodium, potassium, rubidium, they're all very reactive metals. They're similarly reactive. If you look over here, say copper, silver, and gold, they turn out to be valuable because they're shiny and they're rather non-reactive. So they're the coinage metals. So they all have similar properties because they're in the same column. Fluorine, chlorine, bromine, all those halogens, and they all have similar properties. If you think about the horizontal rows going across, they're called periods. H and HE are in the first period. Lithium, beryllium, all the way across here, boron, carbon, nitrogen, those are in the second period. Sodium, magnesium, all the way across to aluminum, silicon, phosphorus, sulfur, chlorine, argon, those are in the same period. If you count up the number of periods in the periodic table, there's 1 period, there's 2, there's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 periods in the periodic table. It could be that someday there will be enough elements made that we'll need an 8th period, but as of right now, that's all that we've found. If you look at the bottom right corner of this slide, you'll see that there are some interesting elements. There's antimony, and it has a symbol, a chemical symbol that doesn't seem to make any sense, SB. If you look at copper, it should be maybe CO, but it actually is Cu for some reason. If you look at gold, that should be GO, right? Or maybe just G, but it actually is given the symbol AU. And you don't have to memorize these or anything, but it's just interesting that many of the elements that we look at in the periodic table have odd symbols because of ancient names which were given to the elements a long time ago. Iron used to be called ferrum, and I imagine that ferrum is still used in some non-English languages. And the same thing goes with lead, which is Pb, from plumbum. If you know of a plumber is a person who up until very recently used lead in pipes and things. And there's some other examples down here for you to look at. The last thing that we should take a look at are the types of elements. And there are three major categories of elements, and they are the metals, the nonmetals, and the metalloids. The metals are over here. Everything that's in red right here is a metal. These are all the metals, and then the nonmetals are to the right side of the periodic table. There's this funny little group of elements right here. I'm highlighting them and it's becoming really, really messy, but those are the semi-metals or the metalloids. So there's two different terms that people use for this, metalloids or semi-metals. Metals are typically solids at room temperature. There's one that's pretty famously an exception to this, and that is Hg, or mercury, which is a liquid at room temperature, but for the most part, iron or cobalt or nickel or gold are solid. They're malleable, so you can take some sort of mallet, hammer, and you can whap them until they get flattened. And that means that they are malleable. For the most part, the metals are ductile, and that means that they can be drawn into a wire. Metals are very good conductors of both electricity and of heat, so they make great frying pans. They're often lustrous, and lustrous is a fancy term that means that they are shiny. So those are the main properties of metals. The second big group of elements that we'll take a look at are the nonmetals, and many nonmetals are gases. If they're solids, they're typically brittle. They're often poor conductors of heat and electricity. Over here on the right side, we've got bromine gas that's glowing because somebody's put electricity through it. If you look down here at this picture of the hammer, somebody has hammered this stuff and it's not malleable because it doesn't get smashed flat, it gets smashed into a million pieces. If you look at the bottom right corner, somebody is using a hot pad to pick up something that's really warm because the cloth is not a good conductor of electricity because the cloth is mostly made up of non-conducting non-metals. If you look over at the left, you can see some of the examples of non-metals. There's carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, sulfur, phosphorus. Non-metals, those found to the right of the periodic table, are often gases, and they're often poor conductors of heat and electricity. Well, we're down to only one last group of elements, and that's the ones that are shown in blue, dark blue. Boron, silicon, germanium, arsenic, antimony, tellurium, polonium. Those are the metalloids. Now you don't really have to memorize all of these, but you should be able to recognize them when you see them because they occupy this strip down here, and they're right between the metals, which are over on the left-hand side. All of these are metals over here. And over on the right side are the non-metals. And so the metalloids are kind of like metals and kind of like non-metals. And they're really interesting and they're very valuable and useful to people, especially silicon. They're often solids at room temperature. They're semiconductors of electricity. And so the picture of the happy computer down here, so that computer has chips inside of it, and those chips are made with silicon because silicon is an excellent semiconductor. It doesn't conduct, and then it does conduct electricity, and we take advantage of that as we use silicon in computers. Well, that's everything that we need to cover for today, so let's take a quick look at what we've done. First, we looked at chemical reaction terminology, the terms reactants and products, and the yield sign. We talked about the vertical columns being called groups or families. So this is a family, this is a family, this is a family, up and down. And we talked about the rows or periods, and periods go across the periodic table. The last thing that we did was we looked at the three different types of elements. There's the metals on the left side of the periodic table, and actually including this bottom group, the non-metals on the right, and then the semiconductors or semi-metals or metalloids in between the two. And there were some other terms that we should probably know. Solid, malleable, ductile, conduction or conductivity, lustrous. Metals are gases, poor conductors of heat and electricity, and then metalloids are the semiconductors that we use in computers. Thank you everybody for watching the video, and I hope this went well for you. Let me know if you have any questions. Goodbye.